Our first speaker is Johan de Priya. He's a business development executive focused on automation. Johan works for a company called IOCO and previously worked at EOH as the business unit head specializing in deploying Microsoft-based solutions to optimize and increase productivity. His role now is designing solutions that encompass the entire digital ecosystem, driving innovation and thought leadership, and assisting customers to unlock the value of their digital investments in a cloud-first world. So welcome, Johan. We're very excited to have you with us this morning and looking forward to getting your insights and your sharing with us around automation and all these different approaches to digital transformation. Welcome.
Thanks, Deirdre. Good morning, everyone. So while I quickly share my screen, as a quick introduction, like Deirdre mentioned, I am part of the automation business in IOCO, and what that essentially means is I have the privilege of helping customers on a daily basis, try to find opportunities to optimize their organizations through automation in support of their overall digital initiatives. And that's really what we want to share with you today. So maybe as a quick start, we're going to start off with a quick poll. So currently, how many of you see automation as a strategic enabler in your organization? Because that is sometimes quite an interesting topic. So while you respond to that, I'm quickly going to run through the slide. So if we look at automation, what we've seen in the market, and especially in the African continent, if you consider the impact of the recent COVID pandemic, and even before that, is that companies are under immense pressure to stay competitive. So a lot of the market drivers we see locally is cost saving and cost reduction, especially lately, it's a very relevant topic. Risk reduction, so risk always has an impact if not reduced and mitigated, which could be financial or brand related. Governance and compliance, so you never want to end up with fines, and in the GRC space, fines can be quite a significant impact. And then I think the last two also quite important. So employee satisfaction. Your employees really make your business work, and there's no easier way to lose an employee than giving them a dissatisfying job. And then customer satisfaction, customer loyalty has been going lower and lower in recent years. So driving out customer satisfaction to drive retention is also quite a prominent driver that we see. And on the right-hand side, we've got some statistics from the industry, which by this time is already a year old. But, in our space that we play, we've seen slower adoption in developing countries, but still think that, it's relevant. And I think the bottom is the most prominent, where about 50% of organizations are actively driving to implement automation to really improve their businesses. And this is from Gartner and Forrester. So, on a global level, that tends to be the trend. So if we could maybe look at the results quickly of the poll. So we've got 94% as yes, which is awesome. I think that's actually great. So, and even hopefully for those who say no and not sure, I can convince you during this session that it really is a key enabler that can help you drive out a more effective business. Okay, so if we move on, if we talk about automation, just to put it into perspective, what we mean when we look at automation is actually quite a few things. So if you look at the right bottom, we start with robotic desktop automation, and that's usually the simplest and the easiest point to start with the quickest value. And that's really taking specific tasks and automating those tasks so that you can get your human worker to do less of the mundane work that they don't necessarily need to do. A good example would be capturing an invoice into the ERP when it's already been sent. It's a simple activity. There's no need that someone needs to sit for hours a day just retyping or copy and pasting things into a system. As we progress to the RPA space, that typically includes automation of multiple tasks in a process, which drives out bigger value and allows even more time to be saved. So if it's highly repetitive type work, that's typically ideal candidates to look at in that space. Then as we progress to the right, when we look at ML and the artificial intelligence space, that's really where we get to intelligent automation. So that's where we make technologies like machine learning work for us. So we can look at prescriptive analytics or predictive analytics and actually drive out processes automatically without having to present certain decisions to human stakeholders. And even with deductive analytics, pivot in the process so that you have dynamic process flows, without needing to take time from people to make those decisions. As you start on the left as well, that's where you start with your simplest, and you typically grow through the right to the more complex data-driven type automations. So with that said, that's a nice overview, but what does that actually mean from a technology perspective? So if we look at the different technologies that are currently available, there's about 6 classifications that we see. And if we start on the left, so that's typically through system integration been the traditional way of automating certain things. A good example would be if you need to interface between an HR system and your Syspro ERP, the easiest way would be to integrate the two systems and have that process flow through end to end. It's still very relevant, and I think we still see quite a lot of that, but it tends to be a slower and slightly more complex exercise in most cases. The second is workflow, and that's traditionally what a lot of organizations have adopted over the past decade. And when I think about workflow, it's typically routing either a document for approvals or just guiding people through a process with auditability and automated progression so that we can complete the process. The way that it differs from your bots and your RPA tools is, in most cases, I wouldn't really see workflow requiring a bot as part of the process, or you might have a task in the process that is done by a bot, but the flow is still maintained typically by your workflow engine. If we move on to the right, computer vision has really changed the way that we can automate specific things. So starting from simple activities like OCR, where you can read and interpret a document and remove that task from a person, through to identification and tracking of objects and items in photo or video, which really could save people from having to sit and watch a piece of security footage the whole day, as a good example. Then if we move to some of the newer technologies, if we look at cognitive agents, what we see quite a lot is in the organizations or in enterprise organizations, digital assistants being built. So that's essentially, if you think in the traditional way, creating a PA that really helps you to do the things that you don't have time for. So I might have a query around a policy, and instead of having to call my line manager or call HR and find out, am I interpreting this policy correctly, I could simply ask my digital assistant, am I allowed to smoke on the balcony at the boardroom? And it would tell me, no, Johan, the smoking policy and the company policy states you have to be 50 meters away from any door, which means you cannot smoke on that balcony. And I don't need to actually then take time from my line manager or take time from someone in HR that they could be spending a lot better. So the difference, once again, between this and an RPA bot would be that a digital assistant is a chat interface that would typically interact with these execution bots or intelligent processes at the back end. The center block, if we look at automation through decision intelligence, that's really where we start bringing artificial intelligence and cognitive computing into the wash. A good example of that is IBM Watson being deployed in the US to handle minor legal incidents. And it's actually proven very effective for legal firms to implement that, because they can now process simple legal cases without even allocating a lawyer to interact with their customers. And the same applies for automated diagnosis of minor diseases in some of the hospitals. So really some interesting things that come to light. It is always a bit more complex, but wonderful things that you can do in that space. Then we look at execution intelligence, which is probably the most prominent of the bunch that I encounter in the market at the moment. And that's where you use tools like Automation Anywhere or OpenRPA to really take some of the tasks that shouldn't necessarily be handled by a person and automating that. And that could be things like, simulating entry into a system, data entry into a system, through to just doing certain activities in the back end, or assisting, a live person in processing things quicker. And a good example, once again, would be if I have a query for my cell phone contract and there's a billing inquiry, then I could very likely be process that entire transaction by interacting with a bot instead of a contact center agent at the cell phone provider's contact center. So I once again would like to just throw up a quick poll. At the moment, something I encountered quite a lot is people feeling threatened by automation and having this feeling that it will take away their jobs. So either from your own perspective or that of your workforce, do you see automation, or do they see automation as a threat? And it's always interesting to see the results on this. So while I go through the slide, please complete the poll and we'll chat about that a bit at the end. So on this, I want to start at the left bottom. So what automation is and it isn't. So firstly, what it's not. It's not industrial robots. So that's not what we see when we talk about automation. It's not talking robots. So it's not the iRobot movie. And we believe it's definitely not the digital workforce completely replacing your human complement. In fact, if we look at the top left, what we see automation really doing is emulation of human worker respective tasks. So that would be doing things that you would usually do without big changes in your technology stack or in your processes. Automation of activities across functions or business units. So, something that I've personally struggled with is, the process of onboarding a person into my organization. So prior to the person onboarding, there's a lot of paperwork that needs to be done. That needs to go to HR, it needs to flow to payroll. Then there's IT equipment that needs to be ordered, etc. And even though we're an integrated organization, it's still disparate functions that don't always work that well together. So the ability to connect those functions in a simple fashion without complicating people's lives is really one of the key things that I think we can benefit from. Data integration from multiple systems, also extremely relevant. If you look at the mining and manufacturing space, a good example in manufacturing would be, if your production suddenly increases, your stock that you need to buy would obviously also increase. And in most cases, there's a big disjoint between your OT and your MES type systems and potentially your ERP. So without necessarily having to view reports and send lots of emails, we can actually take the data from the MES layer, interpret that, and pre-prepare or automate your stock fulfillment so that you are geared for production of higher volumes. And then I think lastly, the simple way to think about how automation can help you. It's not a replacement of the bots acting as a brain. It's really acting as the hands, feet, and eyes. So it literally is an assistant that can do the running, the grabbing, and the reading for you, and allow you to focus on more valuable activities. Then some of the benefits that are very relevant. So enhanced customer experience. So if you, especially in the sales and customer service space, if you can speed up the time in which a customer gets serviced, it drives customer satisfaction. And I think it's a very relevant topic, especially looking at retail, where brand loyalty has really gone down and the retailers are desperate for retaining customers. Process efficiencies, as we have less stops in a process, the process becomes more efficient, but we're also able to identify bottlenecks a lot more or a lot easier if we have automated processes that we can monitor. And that allows us to either supplement the process with additional people, if it's a people-centric task, or build bots to ease the flow through those bottlenecks. Productivity increases. The less time I have to sit and do mundane work, the more I can focus on valuable and productive work. And that's really, I think, one of the key things that we see as an outcome. The next one, especially if we look at RPA, the robotics process automation side of things, there tends to be very quick return on investment if you select your processes to automate correctly. We've seen cases where we've shown ROI within a period of 6 weeks, which is phenomenally fast, considering what investments are required. Improved accuracy, so taking away the risk of human error in certain processes also reduces your risk. The next one, bots don't get tired. Sometimes they get sick, so you have to manage them as you would manage a normal workforce, but they don't get tired. They can work 24/7. And I think that just allows you to increase your throughput and bandwidth significantly in certain processes. And then when it comes to employee engagement, the younger workforce in a lot of cases prefers a digital engagement platform. They don't necessarily want to work with people face to face in certain scenarios. And we've seen quite a lot of that actually. So allowing people to engage through different channels also helps with engaging your employees more effectively. All right. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, so selecting the ideal processes to automate is always quite important. So what we have is, typically if we look at processes that can be automated across any organization, irrespective of the industry, then typically these processes, the shared services type processes, are ideal candidates. Now around the shared services processes, I'll actually dive into it a bit more, but these processes tend to be admin intensive. They tend to be cost drivers, not revenue drivers, and that makes them ideal candidates for automation. Once again, just looking at the process is not necessarily the right answer. So what we need to look at is how do you take a process, so let's say in finance and accounting, and dive into the sub-processes and then select the ideal candidates to automate. And this heat map shows a good example of what are the great ones to automate, which are the blocks in green. Some are the good candidates that are in blue, and the gray blocks are really the areas where, we would say don't really go and try and automate that. And I think that the challenge with this is, in your organization, you might think that, look, supplier and vendor management is a pain for me. I really want to automate that. But automating it might not be the right answer. Automating 4 other processes to free up time from your finance team might actually be the better answer, so that those individuals can focus on, personalized vendor management. And that's quite an important one. So that will either drive you to success, or it could drive you to, showing zero, return on investment if you automate the wrong processes. So I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. All right, so before we jump into the use cases, I actually forgot to queue up the results of the previous poll. So if we can maybe have a quick look at the results of the previous poll. So, looking at this, the response is quite interesting. Typically we get a slightly higher count or percentage of people that still sees a bit of a threat to the job, but still 20% I think is quite high. And the reality is, depending on the industry that you're in and the cultures that you work with, a lot of the time, we do see that threat and the fear factor coming in when it comes to automation. And my advice is always to drive out good communication programs, when it comes to automating, so that you can convince people that this would actually be beneficial to them. It's not a threat. So thank you for the responses. What I want to do now is just quickly jump into 3 practical use cases of some of our SysPro customers that's automated, certain processes. So the first one would be service center or a contact center, automation or process automation. Second would be supplier onboarding and some statutory updates, and then accounts payable. So looking at the first example, so this is a retailer that deals with your end consumer, and they get quite a lot, or quite a high volume of service requirements. So breakages and things that needs to be repaired, and that needs to be checked against warranties, etc. So the typical process that we went through initially was customers would come in and book a device in at the store. There would then be manual logging of the information on a manufacturer system, then on the customer system, then quite a few manual interactions in the back end to create job cards, etc. And through this all, there was a lot of quite a high amount of human error, because the store workers weren't as well motivated to capture information correctly. So from an automation perspective, we essentially automated the process and said, when the customer books the device in, we automate the logging onto the manufacturing system or the manufacturer's system, and we verify the warranty status and the purchase status to ensure that the device is either under warranty or we can charge the customer for repairs. We then create a job and a sales order in SysPro for the repair automatically, and then the device goes through repairs. We then need to process invoicing and collect the money from the customer, which is something that wasn't done that well previously because of the human error element. And then we move on to manage reverse logistics and return the spares to the manufacturer and return the device to the customer based on the standard returns process. So the benefits that they achieved is a reduced time to book in devices, which optimizes the flow in the stores and allow people to interact with more customers. There's a significant reduction in human error, so a lot less typos going in and incorrect warranty status is being selected. high improvement in customer experience. Everything goes quicker and you get your device back and it's actually done efficiently. So great improvement in customer experience. And the big driver in this case was a drastic increase in revenue recovery due to the reduction in human error. Previously, the incorrect capture of warranty statuses meant that the wrong entity would be billed and they would then actually lose out on revenue. So big revenue driver in the end in this example. The next use case is for one of our customers in the mining sector, and any highly regulated sector would, I think, have the same challenges that we solved or tried to solve over here. So essentially this looks at supplier onboarding and management of the statutory requirements for suppliers in the space. What happens quite a lot in this space is, customers accidentally source from their suppliers while the supplier's compliance status is non-compliant because they simply don't know. So in the South African context, every year you need to supply an updated BEE certificate and tax clearance, etc., for you to meet most compliance requirements. So in this case, a portal was developed for supplier onboarding and management. It allows the suppliers to self-register and upload all their documents, so thereby saving time from the procurement team where they previously had to do that or retype from paper forms. It would then also remind the supplier annually that their documents are about to expire and they then need to update those documents. Otherwise, they'll be flagged as a non-compliant supplier on the CISPRO side. So we also have integration to CISPRO where we push the supplier data and the supplier statuses through to the ERP, but we don't have this backwards and forwards to see whether suppliers are actually compliant. We actually then expanded it, so from a statutory reporting perspective, the customer needs to feed back annually on their reporting, and that's quite a hefty job to do manually. So we've automated that process. And the next step that we're looking at is actually automating the accounts payable process through the same interface. So if I'm a supplier, I can just upload my invoice and it will then be processed automatically if everything matches up. So the goals achieved, once again, a reduction in human effort and human error. The human effort reduction sitting specifically in the procurement and the supply chain team. Improved compliance and a reduced risk of fines due to non-compliance. And I think once again, it's that non-compliance was more accidental than anything else, but there's still non-compliance and certain fines were hedged. All right, then if we move on to the last one. So a process that I think is relevant for automation in any organization, accounts payable processing. So that really is automating the process from receipt of an invoice through to extracting that data, automatically matching that to the purchase order data in your ERP. If there's no exceptions or variances, then match that up and send that for approval to payment. So the amount of time saved in your finance department is significant because there's no manual checking. You also reduce the risk of human error. I might mistype or misread a zero, which that's quite a significant thing on an invoice, and that causes people to have to interact constantly with the ERP. So taking away that effort, it also improves supplier relationships. We end up with less disputes, and we also don't have employees dealing with supplier disputes every single day. And I think it supports the overall optimization of the finance functions, as your finance team can then spend time on high value interactions and not on retyping invoices. So that's really, really a prominent one. And, I must say, even our internal finance team benefits from this significantly. We've implemented that in some of the divisions. Really is a high value, quick process to automate. All right, then I think in close, a few things to consider that we always advise people we deal with to look at is to achieve success in if you drive out an automation initiative. It's important to define a strategy, and define a plan based on what you want to achieve. So you have to really go and look at what are those drivers that will change my business. Do I need to save cost? Do I need to improve my customer experience? And then define that strategy to support those drivers. Failing to do that will cost you a lot of money and it won't show value. So I think that's a very important point and a place to start. You also need leadership buy-in and the cultural adoption so that you don't get that threatened feeling that people think they'll lose their jobs. And you need the top-down support to successfully drive out a good initiative. There will be some changes to your operating model, governance and responsibilities and roles that needs to be considered. So be cognizant of that. What we found works well, whether it's a big or a small organization, is share those successes. Measure the value that's shown, share the successes, and then you get people excited and they actually want to be part of that initiative. Engage your functions early because this is typically a business initiative, not a technology initiative, but it's supported by technology. And you need to have the HR team, the technology team, and the business teams working together to really drive out success. Select the right processes. I think once again, that's very valuable, especially when you're starting out. You want to show value. So be wise and take an objective look at which are the valuable processes to automate. Then don't only stop at things like RPA. I truly think it's worthwhile exploring the long-term value of intelligent automation. That's really where we see the world going in the next 5 years, and organizations really becoming more competitive using those technologies. And I think more for the technology side of it, use reusable assets. Redeveloping things over and over is costly and it's time consuming. There's a lot of reusability when you look at automating processes. And I think at the bottom, our advice is engage with a partner that has experience in the space while you're building your own capacity. If I look at the experiences we've gained across different industries, and how that's helped customers just leapfrog ahead in their journeys, it really is worthwhile to engage a partner that has the experience and can guide you. And then I think just lastly, a few of the different technologies that you can consider, especially in the RPA space. In the Syspro world, we see quite a nice gel between Automation Anywhere and Syspro, but there's quite a few different tech around. So AA, UiPath, OpenRPA, Microsoft's Power Automate, etc. And yes, that's essentially me. So over to Deirdre for the Q&A.
Great, thanks, Johan. That was really, really insightful. And I think, just so much to consider. And I think this is where sometimes the challenge of going on any form of automation journey is just about where do we start and what are all the different approaches that one can have. I am going to wait for some questions. I see we haven't got any questions yet. So normally that tells me you either did a fabulous job or everyone's busy drinking their coffee. So let's see if any questions come up. But Johan, I wanted to ask a quick thing. I know I've often had these discussions and a lot of our clients have gone on this journey and just general discussions in the industry. What do you think is one of the biggest challenges, though, that stops or prevents businesses from embarking on an automation project?
So, Deirdre, to be honest, the biggest blocker that I usually see is people think it's a mammoth exercise that's going to be highly complex and you need to plan this thing out for the next 5 years, which is not the case. We believe in taking an agile approach while having a structured plan. So yes, get a strategy in place. If you want to hyper automate, at least plan it out and decide why you want to do it, but then start small and grow. You can start without reinventing the processes in your entire organization and still show a lot of value. And over time, you can start doing the bigger and bigger things. So mostly that's one of the barriers of entry that I see, customers struggle with, especially considering, if there's a sponsor in the organization and they're struggling to sell this to the board or to their peers, that tends to be, the big thing.
Perfect. And I think that is true. And I think also what talks to that as well is, I think the realization that automation is not something we start and stop. I think it's a continuous journey, right? We started, and that's why often in automation discussions or digital transformation discussions, we see the step approach. You see the rung ladder. You start small and you build and you build and you build. And it's really a journey that we continuously evolve in as a business to try and continuously add more value as well. There has come a question across on the Q&A. In Pastel, there's an option to load CSV formatted bank statements into the accounting system. Oh, that's just perhaps this option. Okay, so I'll take this one. Johanna, I wouldn't expect you to answer this. So sorry, to confidence with regards to the question, I can honestly say there is a way currently that you can actually bring in your bank statements, but watch our roadmap space. We are busy doing some work in this area as well to make it even more easier and flexible for our clients. Another comment just come up and it says, what is the capacity to integrate with other automation tools such as MS Flow, MS Forms, etc.? Johan, I know Microsoft, you've got a strong Microsoft background. Your thoughts on MS Flow and Forms?
So I think from my perspective, the players in the market at the moment are so similar. So whether you look at a tool like Automation Anywhere or UiPath, or you look towards the Microsoft, Power Suite, it's actually pretty simple. So you can use Power Automate to do the, let's say, the human interaction simulation through Flow, or even through Logic Apps. You can do the integrations if you have the integration automation requirement. So it's not very complex. I would say irrespective of the platform, the processes would be fairly similar. So, we do see quite a high adoption of the Microsoft Power Platform just because it's part and parcel of that ecosystem. So yes, definitely a good platform to use. And the Syspro APIs are quite extensive. So, it's simple enough to integrate and interact with Syspro on that.
Great, thanks. Must admit, I'm also quite a big fan of Flow, and I think yes, once we get an understanding of how that integration layer works generally between one application or the other, that's half your battle won. It's then just about understanding the different tool sets themselves. Another question that came about, and I must admit, I was wondering about this as well. You gave us, 3 nice use cases that you guys as a team have worked with on some of our clients. So the one question that did come through was, what were the kind of timelines though? Realistically, how long would one expect one of those projects or use cases to take? Are we talking a couple of weeks? Are we talking months? Are we talking years? What is that timeline expectation?
So if I have to take the 3 use cases, and if I recall correctly, so they actually go from most complex to least complex, ironically. So the first one was purely an integration automation. So that is the more complex route to follow, but it was a complex use case. So that was a question of a few months. So if I recall correctly, it's about three months journey to get that done, because the planning, etc., also required some careful consideration. The second, the supplier portal and automation of that, the vendor compliance side of things, definitely a shorter engagement. If I'm not mistaken, it's about an 8 to 10 weeks cycle from start to finish. So having it live, and then accounts payable depends on your internal processes. We've seen accounts payable being automated in 3 weeks. We've seen it being done in 6 weeks. It also depends on the suppliers and the breadth of supplier base that you work with. But yeah, that's a lot quicker, and it's a lot more standardized.
Great. And then just on kind of around that, I suppose one of the other questions that's come up is with regards to some of the use cases and some of the discussions you were having this morning. A question's come up is, do you need to buy those integration tools, or is this a platform that iOCO uses to integrate?
So that's also always a very interesting topic. So integrating in the modern day, I think is really the consideration. So ideally, you want to move to the cloud native, decoupled type world where you've got API management and you have a microservices layer when you integrate. So that's ideally the way I would advise from an architectural perspective that you look at it. What that means is you need some API management technology. So whether you consume that from AWS, you use Microsoft's the Azure Service Bus, or you might have some or buy some in on-premise technologies that you want to use. That would be kind of the advised route. Look, you can do direct API integration, although in most cases it makes your management and supportability, it affects that quite adversely. So I would say the right answer would be use a microservices or an integration technology. Consume the cloud services; they are phenomenal. I'm a big fan of both AWS and Azure, and they've done a lot of the hard work for you. So they are pre-built connectors to a lot of your enterprise platforms. That really makes sense. But yes, essentially, I'd say the right answer would be spend a little bit of money on that, and you'll be future-proofing your technology.
True. And I think, it's just that often reminders, often cases we also go into these discussions, and I think people are so not always aware of the current tool sets they actually already have available that just didn't know that they were there. If you're already a Microsoft user, you already have so much access to those products like Flow. If you're a Supplier user, you've already got the business objects, our workflow, our bots. And sometimes it's just about being able to bring all of those technologies together. They're there already. It's just maybe you haven't leveraged them or been exposed to them yet. So it's also about that understanding what your current tool set has as well, and how best to get those coming forward and being leveraged. Johan, we are running short on time, and I know we need to move on to our next speaker, but there is one more question I just wanted to quickly put forward. Do you think will AI and automation be developed in conjunction with the human factor? So the example here was, do you think that we'll start to see a way where, for example, bots are set to work during working hours only, this way preventing people from feeling like their assistants doing a better job than they are? Do you think we're going to start seeing that trend where whilst we do talk about a bot being 24/7, we might want to start bringing them into normal working hours as well?
So it's an interesting philosophical debate, and I actually came across a discussion like this quite recently where, for one of our customers actually has to create a person or the bots to have access to all of their systems of records. So they actually need to create a digital worker, which means they started thinking, well, what does that actually mean for us? Do we have to think about rights for bots and things like that? Look, I think it's still early days. I wonder about it. I honestly don't know. It would be really interesting. Practically, I see the bots as as really driving out efficiency while our lives get easier. And looking at it that way, I wouldn't really want to give them time off, but it's a philosophical debate, and it's a really interesting topic. So I don't know what the answer is.
Yes. That's all good. We'll have to save it for another coffee chat day. But I do think it's one of those areas where we are going to have to see what that blend of digital citizen with human interaction and human involvement, where that really starts to play out in the upcoming years going forward. Johan, I want to thank you so much. I really appreciate your time this morning. I think you gave us a lot of insights, a lot of things to consider on these automation journeys. So really, thank you once again for your time this morning. Really appreciate it.
Great pleasure. Thanks for having me.